Over the last 20 years, I've hiked every trail in Rocky Mountain National Park, most of them many times. And yet every time I hike the Chasm Lake Trail, it takes my breath away. It is simply one of the most stunning hikes you'll find in all of Rocky Mountain National Park. So in this video, I'll share with you what you can expect and also give you some tips that you need to know before attempting this hike. Now, in my hiking guide, Hiking Rocky Mountain National Park, the Essential Guide, I rate this hike as strenuous, as it's about 8.5 miles round trip with about 2,600 feet of elevation gain. Now, that's a very significant climb for most people, and so you need to be quite fit, and you should also spend a couple of days at higher elevation before attempting this hike in order to allow your body to adjust. That way, you have a better chance of avoiding altitude sickness. The trail starts at the Longs Peak trailhead just off of Highway 7, about 8.5 miles south of Estes Park. Now, one of the challenges with this trailhead is that the parking is very limited, and it's mostly filled by around 3 a.m. in the summer. Yep, you heard me correctly. Most people who climb Longs Peak leave by around 2 a.m. so that they can be back down the mountain before the violent afternoon thunderstorms arrive. Since the parking lot is usually full when Chasm Lake hikers arrive, you're going to need to park alongside the road and then walk up to the trailhead. But I should warn you that parking along the road is pretty rough. I wouldn't want to do it with a fancy car. You'll find the trailhead right beside the Longs Peak Ranger Station, where there are park rangers and knowledgeable park volunteers who are happy to answer any questions you might have. You'll even find my hiking guides there. Stop in and look at some of the historical photos and items from the past century of climbing Longs Peak. Now, if you're here in June or early July, ask the rangers about trail conditions for Chasm Lake before heading up. Typically, when I hike this trail, I find that I start much too fast. The first section of trail quickly becomes pretty steep, so I've had to train myself to take this first section slowly in order to conserve energy. Now, during the first 2 miles of the hike, the trail winds through the forest, occasionally coming alongside a small stream called Alpine Brook. Now, most of the forested section is through an area called Goblin's Forest. The name seems much more appropriate when you hike through it in the dark. Now, once in a while, as you're hiking up this trail, you'll encounter park staff with llamas. They head up the trail a couple of times a week in order to shovel out the toilets and to carry waste down. I'm not sure if they have the worst job in the park or the very best, as they get to hike this beautiful trail as part of their job. After 2 miles of climbing upward through the forest, you'll reach a bridge over a delightful cascade. We call this Lightning Bridge, named for the sign you'll find there. The sign warns hikers about the dangerous electrical storms you can encounter above treeline during the summer months. Because of these dangerous storms, the hike to Chasm Lake should be done early in the morning so that you can get back down below treeline before the storms arrive. Now, shortly after Lightning Bridge, the trees begin to thin, and before you know it, you're at treeline, where it begins to be too cold for trees to grow. From here onward, you'll be exposed to the sun and to the wind. Often, except for on the warmest summer days, that wind can be icy cold, so be sure you have warm clothing with you. Now, if at any time you see storm clouds developing, then it's time to turn around and try again another day. Well, as the last of the trees and the crumholts give way, you'll get your first views of Longs Peak towering over the trail above you. For the next mile, you'll continue winding upward through rough rock and boulders. It can feel quite exhausting. You'll likely encounter some really big rock steps, and they're no fun at all. But fortunately, the National Park's trail crew has been working hard to replace those steps with a new style of trail that feels much more like a sidewalk. For years, people have been avoiding the steps and walking on the delicate tundra, creating a maze of new trails. Because this new trail is so enjoyable to walk on, it actually keeps people from walking on the tundra. Now, over the coming years, you can expect this trail to keep getting better and better as the trail crews complete new sections. After much winding upward through the rugged terrain, the trail eventually makes a very sharp turn to the left and then climbs steeply up a set of rock stairs. When this happens, don't despair, because at the top of those stairs, you arrive at Chasm Junction. This is where the trail for Longs Peak and Chasm Lake divides, and this is where the hike becomes stunning. It's also a great place to take a break as you enjoy the wonderful views in every direction. Now, just a little ways up the path from Chasm Junction, there's a small stone building with a toilet. It's unlikely that you'll ever find a toilet with a better view. Just don't expect any running water. From here, the trail is fairly gentle as we head straight towards the imposing east face of Long's Peak, known as the Diamond. This is perhaps my favorite section of trail in Rocky Mountain National Park. You'll even see it on the cover of my hiking guide. The land on the south side of the trail drops away, and the mountains rise up above you, making you feel very small. Below, you begin to get views of Peacock Pool. You'll also hear the roar of a waterfall. This is Columbine Falls at the end of the valley, which pours into Peacock Pool. When I'm hiking this section, I often feel as if I'm hiking into Rivendell, the hidden city of elves from Lord of the Rings. Now, as you start to get close to the waterfall, there is a section of trail that holds on to snow into mid-June or sometimes even early July. This snow slope can be very dangerous, and people have died trying to cross it. So I recommend waiting to do this hike until it has melted out. Check with the rangers for current conditions if you want to do this hike before the second week of July. Today, however, it is later in the season, and so instead of a snowfield, there are hundreds of purple columbines growing in the boulder field. As you leave the boulder field, you'll walk over the stream just above Columbine Falls and enter the delightful area known as Chasm Meadow. During midsummer, this meadow is usually lush green and filled with wildflowers, with a gentle stream meandering through the middle. Now, it may be a little muddy and you may get your boots wet here, especially earlier in the summer, but stay on the trail even though it's muddy in order to protect the delicate vegetation. Now, you'll soon notice another waterfall coming down from high above and up to your right. This one is flowing out of Chasm Lake. As you make your way to the back of this beautiful meadow, you'll eventually reach a sign pointing up and to the right into the rocks. Here, the trail becomes a scramble. You'll probably have to use your hands as well as your feet to climb up. Take your time, and it isn't too difficult. Now, most people can do it without much problem, unless you have issues with balance or heights, and it really isn't that high. When you finish the scramble, you're at the top. Here, you're surrounded by walls of granite, as if you're in an amphitheater. The sheer face of Long's Peak towers 2,500 feet above you. It's impressive. And if you spend a little time looking with binoculars, you may spot rock climbers making their way towards the summit. Now, at the base of this imposing cliff, you'll find the still waters of Chasm Lake. And during the early summer, there are often big chunks of ice floating here. The whole area is simply stunning and well worth the effort. If you've ever done it, I'm certain you will agree, because the hike to Chasm Lake is just so dramatic. However, if you want to take it to another level, then try to arrive here in time for sunrise on a cloud-free morning. If there are no clouds blocking the horizon, then as the sun rises, this entire granite amphitheater and Chasm Lake itself glows with a magical red hue. It's one of the most incredible experiences you can have in Rocky Mountain National Park. Now, this requires a very early start and doing the hike in the dark, but I hope that at least a few of you will make the effort and experience it for yourself. Now, if you've done this hike or been at the lake for sunrise, please share about it in the comments. Now, before we finish, I want to remind you of a few key things that you should be aware of before you do this hike. Firstly, plan to do this hike between the second week of July and the first big snowfall in the autumn. Now, this is to avoid that dangerous snowfield that I talked about. If you're wanting to do it earlier, then I recommend that you talk to a park ranger about what the conditions are on that year before attempting it, because it really can vary from year to year. Secondly, avoid the afternoon electrical storms by beginning your hike early. I recommend that you start your hike between 6 and 7 a.m., much earlier if you want to watch the sunrise up there. Third, ensure that you've spent several days at high elevation before doing this hike. It really is no fun to do this hike with nausea and a pounding headache. Also, bring adequate water and food with you. Bring warmer clothing, winter hat, gloves, warm jacket, and a windproof jacket. And lastly, be prepared for a rough, rocky trail and some scrambling at the end. Well, I hope you enjoyed this virtual hike. If you did, consider giving me a thumbs up or leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. And if you want to see more like this, subscribe. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope to see you out on the trail. To help you prepare for your visit to Rocky Mountain National Park, visit my website, rockymountainnationalpark.com. For hiking guides, calendars, coffee table books, and more, visit rockytrailpress.com. And when you arrive, be sure and stop by my gallery in downtown Estes Park. It's called Images of RMNP.